Thank you very much for listening to this week's talk on the Sedra of Bo that we read this coming Shabbos. And before we delve into the incredible messages of this week's Sedra with all of the high drama and the foundation of our nation in the culmination of the 10 plagues and the Exodus from Egypt. And before we do that, just to pause a moment and reflect on the date, which is the beginning of Shavat. We had Rosh Chodesh Shavat on Monday, and the 5 weeks, the month of Shavat and the first week in Adar, are especially auspicious. We recall the time that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, started to review the Torah, to go over the mitzvahs, to add the warnings and the predictions and the trying to give encouragement to the children of Israel in his final address in the book of Devarim, or which constitutes the book of Devarim. And this happened at the calendar time that we find ourselves now, from Rosh Chodesh Shvat to the 7th of Adar, when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. And this is an especially auspicious time for our learning, and it's also the third Sedra in the book of Shemos, the third Sedra of the group of Sedras known as Shovavim, Shemos, Va'era, Bo, B'Shalach, Yisro, Mishpatim, which again are very auspicious in terms of the content of the Exodus from Egypt and the receiving of the Ten Commandments and the building of that was going to be after that. The building of the Mishkan comes after Shovavim, but the title Shovavim really signifies the unique events that happen in the events of these Sedras. So that is the background to where we are, and to today, with all of the huge amount, variety of vital material in the Sedra, I want to concentrate on the last plague, but firstborn. And the last plague of the last of the 10 plagues that we read about in this week's Sedra Bo, we have the final 3 plagues: locusts, darkness, and the smiting of the firstborn. And they although all of the plagues are so intense, and all of them in some way or another overturn the natural order, with a view to teaching the Egyptians, the Jewish people, and anybody who pays attention to the words that Hashem, the Creator, is in control, and He establishes the natural order, but then where the circumstance demands it, as in Yetzias Mitzrayim, He can overturn that. And this message, although there is a sort of a build-up, if we could look at it in some ways, very different ways of classifying these 10 plagues, of battle strategies, and ways of showing that Hashem is in control over sort of various levels of creation, of the ground, of the airspace, and then the higher realms, and all of that really. As we approach this last plague of Makas Bechoros, that is the plague that is going to bring the entire edifice crumbling. Although it has sustained such huge damage with every single plague, yet somehow, although bloodied, Pharaoh managed to get up and change his mind again after every plague, after the threat was removed, and seemed to forget all of his promises. Yet with this last plague of Makas Bechoros, even though when we see in the Sedra of B'Shalach that Paro's apparent recognition of Hashem and his sending out of the Jewish people does seem to be qualified, and he is harnessing his chariot and chasing after them in the Sedra of B'Shalach. However, this plague of Makas Bechoros is so significant, And on the one hand, we can see it as a measure for measure, and everything is perfectly calibrated. And in every area, the Egyptians are sort of the accounts are squared, so to speak. But I think there's a way of looking at the concept of Makas Bechoros and how it fits in with earlier words of Hashem, and really trying to understand the concept of a Bechor. What does this mean? How is this relevant to Pharaoh and his reaction, and also to the Jewish people at the time of the Exodus from Egypt and for all time. So just with that background, to go to the actual verses, if we look, we'll start with the opening words of this week's Sedra, which is chapter 11, verse 1. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Od nega echad avi al Paro. And Hashem said to Moshe, there is one more plague that I will bring against Pharaoh, al Mitzrayim, and against Egypt. Acharei chein, after that, Yeshalach eschem mizeh, he will send you forth from here. And this is really this concept of just one last thing, and that is going to be the absolute sledgehammer. And it is spelt out a few verses later. Vayomer Moshe, and Moshe said, Ko amar Hashem, thus says Hashem, kachatzos halayla, at about midnight, ani yotzei besoch Mitzrayim, I shall go out in the midst of Egypt, umeis kol bachor be'eretz Mitzrayim, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, mi bachor Paro, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, hayoshev al kiso, who sits on his throne, ad bachor hashivcha asher acha horechoyim, until the firstborn of the maidservant who is behind the millstone, v'chol bechor behema, and every firstborn of every cattle. And if we just pause here a moment, in common with other plagues where the Egyptians were specifically targeted. So, for example, go back to the first plague, the plague of blood. The Medrash tells us that the Egyptian waters were contaminated to the extent that if an Egyptian and a Jewish person were standing next to each other, the Egyptian had a glass of what started out as water and then turned to blood, and the Jewish person had a glass of water. And if the Egyptian would try to take that glass of water away, it then became blood. So this is a theme. For example, with Dever, with the pestilence, the Egyptian cattle are stricken with this deadly disease, yet the Jewish cattle are spared. And even as all of his cattle stocks, his country's cattle stocks are decimated, instead of going out to pay visits to the farmers who have lost their livelihood, to the livestock people who no longer have their herds, Pharaoh goes to check what's happened in the land of Goshen to the Jewish people, and he finds out, verifies that not one cattle died in the land of Goshen. So this combination of the power of Hashem to bring about these plagues, but in a very precise way, precise targeting the Egyptian. This is not a plague that runs its course and will kill innocent along with guilty. This is a very specific target. And we see that this target, this targeting of the firstborn is going to take place at such a high level when we have the plague of Makos Bechoros, and it will be the Egyptian firstborns, and it will cross all strata of society, and it will extend to animals as well, and all of the firstborns in the Egyptian categories will die. And if we try to think, apart from the heartbreak that is going to strike every family, and there is this leveling, there is no hierarchy for a society that was so hierarchical, that had so many layers, and the higher up you were, the more valuable your life was, the more you were protected against certain vicissitudes of life. And yet, when it comes to this plague, everybody is on the same level, and nobody can have any illusions that being born into a priestly caste or being born into a royal household was going to get you any exemptions. Every single human being was a family group, had that same loss of their firstborn child. And what is it about the firstborn? Why is this such an arrow strike at the heart of Pharaoh, that in all the other plagues where he has watched his country slowly but surely be destroyed and somehow managed to plow through and carry on with his stubbornness? And there are many different explanations for that apparent courage, strength, stubbornness, to be able to shut his mind to the reality, to be completely oblivious. And yet, when it comes to this, apart from the fact that Pharaoh himself is a firstborn, that this is something that is really teaching so many vital lessons. And it's very interesting to think, going back to the idea that there is this perfect justice, that Hashem is approaching everything that he is doing against the Egyptians is in some way a measure for measure, in terms of the way the Egyptians mistreated the Jewish people. Then each plague addressed a specific issue and was a midah keneged midah, measure for measure, and a way of achieving perfect justice. But the concept of the firstborn as the climax of all the plagues, and what is going to cause Pharaoh's response to just say, get out, that is something that has in its origin, we find it in a verse right at the beginning of the book of Shemos, and chapter 4. And this is when Hashem is entreating Moshe Rabbeinu to go to Pharaoh in Egypt and let the Jewish people go. And Moshe is a very unwilling messenger, and that there is sort of a lot of to and fro going on. And then chapter 4 verse 22, Hashem says, Va'amarta el Paro, and you will say to Pharaoh, Ko Omar Hashem, so says Hashem, Bani Bechori Yisrael, my son, my firstborn Israel. Va'omar elecha, and I will say to you, Shalach es bani, send out my son, Vaya'avdeni, and he will serve me, Vatema'en l'shalcho, but you refused to send him. Hine, should you refuse to send him, Hine onochi horeg es bincha b'chorcha, I will kill your firstborn, your son. And this is way before Moshe Rabbeinu is having actual conversations with Pharaoh. He's just by the burning bush. He is on his way going to join. He is with Zipporah and his sons, and Zipporah gives one of his sons bris milah, and this is before Moshe Rabbeinu has arrived in Egypt. And so we have this before we have had any conversations with Pharaoh, before we've got any of the plagues, there is this reference to the children of the people of Israel, the children of Israel, being Bani Bechori, my son, my firstborn. And it really is important to understand how all of these pieces are fitting together, how this reference to Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael as Hashem's firstborn, the 10 plagues culminating in the killing of the Egyptian firstborn. And that is that is really setting the stage for a concept of a firstborn, to understand the firstborn as not, although there's on the superficial, so to speak, level, the firstborn is your birth order, the firstborn child. That's not something that is a choice. That's not something that is contingent on my doing anything. So that is the technical concept of the firstborn. But the fact that Hashem is choosing a people as his firstborn, this is not, it's not as if the children of Israel were the actual firstborns. We are going beyond the literal concept of a firstborn to this idea of a bridge between generations. The firstborn is, historically in earlier cultures, given that special pride of place because they were going to be invested with a greater responsibility, whether it's for subsequent siblings or the affairs of the family. So the firstborn would have that responsibility, and with that would come the expectation of reward. However, the concept of firstborn as somebody that is stepping up to the plate, that is a support, a connection, a bridge between the parent and the rest of the family. That is something that the people of Israel are going to discharge. That is something that we are going to see. We can actually see in the mission, the charge to bring the Korban Pesach, and by performing, by carrying out the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, especially at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, that fateful Pesach in Egypt, when the Jewish people took the god of the Egyptians, and it's something that I've seen visually, that you go to the British Museum and you see various idols from the Egyptology department from the time of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And there was one that particularly struck me, that we'd seen very huge statues of the pharaohs, but there was a statue, an idol of a sheep, and then a very, very tiny pharaoh within that sheep. So the pharaoh was being dwarfed by the sheep, and it really gave me this visual identity of the sheep as being the superpower, the super god, and the children of Israel. And we have it actually in the Sedra of Bo. We have, that's chapter 12, verse 3. Dabru el kol adas Yisrael, speak to the entire children, to the entire congregation of Israel, Lema, saying, Be'osar lachodesh, on the Hazeh, on the 10th of this month, V'yikhu lahem ish se leves avos. They shall take for themselves each person a lamb for their father's house, sel abayis, a lamb for each household, and then it's v'haya lachem lemishmeres. This is verse 6, and it shall be for you as for examination, for guarding over, ad arba oso yom lachodesh hazeh, until the 14th day of this month. V'shachatu oso kol kahal adas Yisrael ben harbaim, and the entire congregation of the community of Israel will slaughter it, and they should slaughter it at twilight. And then they have to take from the blood and put it on the doorposts and on the lintel. This act, this audacious act that was an absolute insult, abomination to the Egyptian taskmasters, to the Egyptians who had been persecuting the children of Israel for hundreds of years. And with this act of bravery, carrying out the command of Hashem, the Jewish people were rising to the occasion. They were taking the commandment of Hashem and carrying it out in such a way that showed that they are taking on this status of Bechor, this exalted position of firstborn, not because they had been born first, but because they had risen to the mission. And very interesting in terms of looking at the book of Bereshis and also the book of Shemos. And we see that very often the actual firstborns did not inherit the position. It was the younger children who were favored, that it is a meritocracy rather than something that is determined by birth. And this carries on later when we see that the firstborns, after the sin of the golden calf, they lose their elevated status and it's transferred to the tribe of Levi. And this is already embedded in the concept, in the way we learn that in Makas Bechoros, this idea that there is a man-made hierarchy, that human beings can decide who is on the top, who has the most power, and everybody underneath is subjugated to the most powerful one. But really, Makas Bechoros is showing the Egyptians, and it's also showing the Jewish people as well, that yes, we are considered Hashem's firstborn, but it's a position that we need to earn, that we need to justify. We had to bring the Korban Pesach in Egypt at the time of our exodus from Egypt, and subsequently after that, as we keep the Torah, we need to step up to the plate. We need to show that we are worthy of that title of B'ni Bechori Yisrael. So I think that when we look at the plague of Makas Bechoros, yes, it is the most intense. It strikes specifically, directly, every single Egyptian family and shows up the contrast in this way when the Jewish families are spared. But it's also teaching us a broader concept. It's teaching us, reinforcing this concept of Hashem's control over everything, and how we have got that wonderful title of firstborn, but it's not something that it is applied in the literal sense. And this is something that is really very clearly learned from all of these Pesukim, from these verses and the description of Makas Bechoros, the smiting of the firstborn. And just going back to the concept of the Korban Pesach and how that was so essential in this lesson and in Bnei Yisrael rising up to the occasion. All of the halachos, the customs around the Korban Pesach are very concentrated on keeping the unity, the oneness, the close connection between the children of Israel and Hashem. And just looking at this, the laws of the sacrifice, that for example it had to be roasted, not boiled, because when meat is roasted it keeps its shape, but when it's boiled it breaks up into many pieces, and it had to be eaten as in family groups, in family units. No bones could be broken. It needs to be kept whole. It needs to be eaten as quickly as possible, which is really as close as possible to 1 unit of time. And in all these ways, the Korban Pesach is testifying to that oneness, to that unity, to that Hashem Echad. And this is a symbol of Hashem Echad, and a symbol and a practical application of the Bnei Yisrael and how they are rising to the mission, how they are saying to their parent, their heavenly parent, we want to be your Bechor. We want to carry out your wishes, your desires, and we want to serve you. And then we are worthy of the elevated status of Bechor. And we learn that in the positive from the way the Bnei Yisrael carry out the Korban Pesach, and we learn it in the negative with the destruction of the firstborns that occurred in the 10th plague. And so I wish everybody very good Shabbos, and a very auspicious time, that our learning should really be very productive and bring blessing to everyone. Thank you very much.